I was thrilled to hear that there are 18 NFL teams that are represented at this conference this year, which I think is the most, and I think that tells you all we need to know about football and about the import that it has, not only for the sports analytics, but obviously in this entire country. And I'm thrilled with the panel that we have this year. And look, you can read everybody's bio in the pamphlets that you have, in the programs that you have. But I just wanted to know something that led each of these men to the successes that they have today. So Kevin Demoff, yes, we know he's with the Rams, but more importantly, he did his first college bowl pool when he was 6 years old, his first fantasy football when he was 7 years old, and his first mock draft at the age of 11. And when you're the son of the iconic Marvin Demoff, this is what you grow up with. And obviously, you know, as he said, he heard one conversation for his entire life, and now he gets to be on the other side. So now we know something about where Kevin has come from. As for Aaron, he was a Bill James devotee at the age of 10, which sort of sets him up for where he is now. Parag, I just learned, his junior year in college saw Jerry Maguire, thought, wow, I hadn't even thought about that as a career. And the next week he applied to IMG and his career soared. And Scott, of course, won a championship your junior year in high school.
Yes.
And all he has done is gone on to win 3 Super Bowl championships as an executive in addition to being a 5-time executive of the year. So it's interesting where everybody started and certainly where they are now. So we appreciate everybody on the panel. All right, let's get right at it. One thing I do want to know, the teams that you are with or have been with, do you have an analytics guy, an analytics person specifically?
We don't currently, and we were thinking about hiring one when everybody said don't say that in this room. You're thinking of hiring an analytics guy because you get bum rushed. But I think everybody's at the stage of trying to figure out for us how we can hire, what makes sense, and really what we're looking for, how you can integrate it into everything we do and really take the analytics that we currently do as a staff, whether it's coaches, scouts, front office, and take it to the next level. But I think a lot of teams, when you talk to, seem to be in similar stages, but I'd be curious to hear from the others.
Niners?
Well, we've had one since 2001 when we hired somebody out of Bain. So I've been there for 12 years, focused a lot. That's how I start. That's how I got my career start, is focusing on analytics around the salary cap and around evaluating different characteristics of players. And we're still trying to build. So we are hiring analysts both on the football and the business side of the organization still.
Your 2 teams?
And they're both staying at the Westin if you guys need room numbers. All of you people looking for a job, so feel free to.
You could broker
it's going to be like
them.
the Beatles are in town. All of my stops, we've had someone involved in analytics, mostly salary cap. But what we've done from there is we've wanted that person to do more than the salary cap, to delve deeper. And as we were talking back there, is every team seems to have it. We don't like to all admit it because it's not cool in football. For whatever reason, this industry is resisting. Because even the smartest people don't want to come across as smart, it seems like sometimes, and just as part of the football culture, it seems. And the quality control coaches, as we mentioned, they do analytics work. So they're with every team pretty much.
Right. But I said, first of all, people have to bear with me because I'm having some vocal problems. I mean, NFL teams have probably done analytics longer than any other sport. It's just you didn't think of it as that. But quality control is essentially analytics. You have a guy who watches the last 4 or 5 games of your next opponent, and he gives the coaches a report that's essentially a statistical report. You know, what formations do they run on 3rd and short? How often do they run and pass out each of them, and so on and so forth.
And it's interesting, when you think of quality control coaches, like, I mean, the first one that comes to mind for me, I guess, is John Gruden, who started off that way.
A lot of guys started off.
Right, a lot of guys have,
quality
and they ended up in, obviously, with the head coaching position. What role do analytics play in such a highly subjective area as player evaluation?
Well, I'll take the first crack at that. It plays a role. It's a very important role, and yet at the same time, it's still one tool in the overall evaluation of a player. And the teams that do it well do a good job of marrying that delicate balance between a pure scouting evaluation and the analytical evaluation of that player or a draft pick or whatever it might be. And with respect to the draft and analytics, I mean, there's reams of data collected, whether it's physical measurements, height, weight, body fat, or athletic characteristics, explosion, speed, strength, those types of things. Even mental traits, whether it's dedication or self-efficacy of a player, those types of things. There's a lot of opportunity to analyze that data and help support or augment the scouting process to help decide on which players to draft. And really the teams that really do it well are the teams that marry those two, where one supports the other in a really good relationship.
I'd say two things. One is that stats see every play. When your memory tends to sometimes trick you and see just the best or the worst plays, certain plays that stand out. And you have to remember that stats see every play, including all the average ones or slightly below average or slightly above average. And the other thing I think is that stats help with figuring out where a player's skills fit on the continuum of players at his position. Maybe you can't do the kind of in-depth scouting of all 112 defensive ends in the league or whatever, but you can get stats on all of them, and then you at least know what the stats on your guy say, and also how his talents have turned into production, because sometimes talents don't turn into production.
Well, you've got your eyes and your gut. Where do numbers fit into that?
I think that for many of the football people, particularly the evaluators, gut is based on analytics. I mean, anyone who makes a gut decision, you don't just pull something out of your mind. It's based on previous information and experience. And that comes from, if you make a gut decision, it's based on having some sort of experience or idea or analysis that's previously happened that allows you to feel a certain way about a decision that should be made.
So specifically, say the combine just ended. What tests that are run at the combine do you feel are most significant, are most telling?
No, I think it depends on the position, but the one thing that we did this year for the first time in our organization was we graded our players on what we thought they would do on the tests ahead of the tests that they actually took. So before they ran the 40, we gave a grade to how fast we thought the player was and evaluated that. So you really didn't look as much at the test. Maybe if a guy was a significant outlier from their projected performance, you would take a different look at the guy. But I don't think there's any one test. Every position probably has something that's more unique. You'll hear offensive line
Well, give me an
coaches.
example for
Offensive line
position.
coaches will talk about the first 10 in a 40-yard dash, for example. Something like that. Someone will look at a short shuttle maybe for players' long speed versus agility. But I think when you look ultimately at the combine, it's not, you're trying to gauge maybe a different impression to me or our staff than what you already saw when you watched them play football. What are they going to do that's uniquely different, that surprised you or disappointed you? Because for the most part, I think guys perform as you would expect them to perform in all the tests.
Can you pick another position and see a test that you feel is particularly germane?
I'm not a big fan of the combine. Again, because similar to what Kevin's talking about, there's speed, which is pure speed, which you can measure, and then there's playing speed. And playing speed, like everyone's talking about the Manti Te'o's 40 time. The reality is the way he anticipates and sees things and reacts in his short area of mobility at the snap of the ball, as he processes things a lot quicker than some other players who have much more pure speed, it's a completely different type of speed. So you'll have guys who run great 40 times and who, again, I can think of a safety in particular that we had who was a 4.3 guy, but when you put him on the playing field, because whether it was his ability to see, process, and then move his feet, his playing speed was completely different. So a lot of the things that we get there are certain things, like measurements have some value to me. Like one of the things we were talking about, the measurements of quarterbacks and quarterbacks' hand size. For instance, I was part of making a very bad decision on a player, Cliff Kingsbury, who was a highly productive quarterback, had one of the smallest hand sizes at the combine that year. I think actually that year was the smallest, and we asked him to come to New England in inclement weather and try to throw the football and control the football. Or you have someone like Tom Brady who has an enormous hand. You look at the pictures of Tommy holding a football, part of his accuracy is based on his hand size. So things like that in terms of measurements, they have value. But the times and the numbers of bench press, it's misleading to me at times.
There's still some hidden value in different things. I mean, like for example, we always talk about one with respect to the 40-yard dash and wide receivers. I mean, you look at the 40-yard dash, and as Scott said, it's like on the field, what they do in terms of playing speed is so much different. But there are some correlative, predictive things at least. I mean, we always talk about Jerry Rice, for example. Jerry Rice had a very average 40 time. But what we found as something that really helps correlate to performance is what we call the flying 20, which is the 20 to the 40. They time you when you run the 40-yard dash to the 10, 20, and 40. So that time between the 20 and the 40, what that speed is, which is, intuitively that's separation speed, right? Because the corner's already lining up, 5 to 9 yards behind the receiver. So he's already just backpedaling during that first 10 yards. So at the time where they're both running in the same direction, that's your separation speed. And Jerry Rice has one of the fastest flying 20s of all time. And so that's an example of, there is, and everyone still looks at a 40-yard dash as the measurement of a wide receiver's success, or speed, when there's some hidden value there in different places.
I will point out that we've actually found kind of almost the opposite, which is that our projections for wide receivers look only at the first 10 seconds. So I don't know whether it's maybe something that's only changed in the last few years. Obviously, we're not projecting back to working on the 80s, but we did find Bill.
Why is that?
Why is that? It's
Yeah.
just the first 10 seconds.
Why is
I
that
don't know.
significant?
Maybe getting separation right in the first beginning of the route. I don't know why that's the case, but the vertical jump also, I believe, correlates a little bit. But none of these things are straight correlations on their own. It's all like you have to look at it all in the bigger picture of things. Bill Barnwell's here somewhere, and he created a thing for us a few years ago called Speed Score that actually does a pretty good job of projecting the running backs that are going to do well in the NFL, because it's based not just on 40 time, but on the weight and the fact that a faster, a larger guy may run not quite as fast, but because he'll have more power. And obviously, this is just one measure, and there are other ways to judge guys, and it won't be perfect, but it does a pretty good job of spotting guys who are going to be top players in the class and guys who are going to be busts. A good example is it really didn't like Mark Ingram, even though he'd won the Heisman Trophy, and I think he's been a bit of a disappointment as a pro because he's not quite fast enough for his size.
Real quick, one of the interesting things I love the flying 22 because it's something we looked at, and also the first 10. But there's these other elements that come into it that can blow both of those things up too, unfortunately, which is the certain receivers who have never faced press coverage. And it doesn't matter how fast they run, their playing speed is, they can't get off the line of scrimmage.
Right.
So there's this other element that comes in. The other thing is a big part of separation has to do with just close space quickness and or strength. There's some guys that create separation because of their strength in pushing off receivers, not the guys push off. But there's also that element of getting as close as they can. A lot of those smaller, the Wes Welkers, the Troy Browns, the Wayne Corbett's, smaller, undersized guys who have some short area quickness where they're covered like a blanket, but boom, all of a sudden they can create separation. And trying to piece all that together that's the fun part.
And are those things quantifiable, or can you put and attach numbers to those sorts of things?
Yeah, I mean, they have tests where they have the short shuttle, long shuttle, but we haven't found a test. And there's tests out there, but I haven't found a test that really measures reactive quickness. Because there's most of these drills that the players do are them performing on their own. But then there's this element of reactive quickness and reactive speed that so much of this game is reaction, and it's based on, again, seeing, processing, and then moving the feet. And that's
It's always less valuable to see a guy doing something against the air.
Right.
So are there any other tests or drills or something in particular that are not run at the combine that when they come in for their private workouts, you may put guys through that you think are relevant?
Come on, Kevin, you're going to give a little information here now.
One of the things I think that last year we did, the week before the draft, we flew to 5 different schools and individually worked out 5 of the top receivers, in the draft and put them through the exact same paces. But some of the difference was you didn't run them in the 40, you didn't run them in shuttles. You ran them in different routes and different combinations, and we took 2 of our quarterbacks with them. And the one who excelled dramatically was Brian Quick from Appalachian State. And we go back to gut feel versus instinct. Just when you looked at them all back to back to back to back, his was by far the best workout, and it included pretty much everybody they took. And the other guy who was extremely impressive out of nowhere for us was A.J. Jenkins, who the 49ers drafted. And one of those things is you get up close to these guys in small situations, and you can just feel their talent. It's not something you see at the combine. And one of the things at the combine, you're very far removed from everything. So most times at workouts, whether it's a college workout before the draft or a pro workout, you bring them in, you're 5-10 yards away. At the combine, you're 20-30 yards away. You might be up high. You're watching on television. I think some of these guys, to get a difference in the little nuances of how they set up a route, how they get off press coverage, how they do some of those things, you've got to be right there to see it, feel it, and it is more gut than it ever is going to be analytics.
So for certain positions, are there key measurables that can predict performance? Like, so for example, say you have a defensive end with arms that are more than 34 inches and he runs a 4.8, and so that means that he could average 5 sacks a year for the first 3 seasons, something along those lines. Are there key measurables that correlate to performance?
There's no unified grand theory that I've found, at least, that I've seen that solves that. Because there's so much in play with respect to the team system. The other defensive end, how much is he getting double teamed, leaving this one open for single coverage, or single teamed? There's so many others. There's so much covariance in a football game because there's so many other factors that impact. A running back's ability to be successful isn't just the running backs; it's the offensive line, it's the quarterbacks, selling a pass, it's the receivers blocking at the second level. There's so much involved. So there is no hard and fast, running back runs X, weighs Y, and has N smarts. He's going to be successful. There's so many just unique system components to it.
I would agree, because what's different or seemingly different as you talk to people in different sports, one of the things that we bump up against all the time in trying to be predictors through analytics is the fact that football is based on all these interdependent relationships. And there's so many variables, whether it's playing surface, the weather, there's the environment, and then you're talking about 11 interdependent relationships where a person's success on one play is so dependent upon what someone else is doing or not doing. It makes it really difficult, Andrea, to say, okay, X, Y, and Z are going to equal this.
That's why trading players is, a lot of times it's not as successful because a player looks really good in one system and doesn't turn out to be the same because you completely change the environment around that player with respect to the system, the coaching, the style of play, the opponents you play. Everything changes, and the player may not be as successful.
Right, and how many times have we seen coaches that fall in love with an opponent who does really well against them, and then now the opposite of that is someone like Wes Welker, because Wes Welker did well in Miami, for example. You guys picked him up, and he's thrived exponentially.
He was on the rise, and he wore us out, and he had the potential to, and there was this transition happening where he fit the role similarly to the role that Troy Brown was going to vacate.
But how do you know what a Wes Welker's worth? That's the thing. With respect to any kind of trade, Parag brings it up. How do you know what a guy is worth? What you should give up to get someone? How do you decide that? Again, trying to keep it along the lines of using analytics metrics, whatever you want to call it.
Well, I think you look at historical data on certainly getting in the draft, trades that people have given up, or measurables. But when you get into situations where they're unique. Last year when we did the RG3 trade, we knew we were it was new rookie wage scale system. Two teams that were really desperate for quarterbacks. You didn't have to look at any kind of historical comps. We just we want to break every record there is in terms of the value we get for this trade. And fortunately, there were enough teams in it that you could do it. So I think every time it's somewhat interdependent. I mean, we'll all go into free agency next week, and I don't think there's ever been a deal done in the first 2 days of free agency that you ever really like. You're going to do it poorly because every analytic device you use, every test, every measure doesn't matter when you're 2 hours into free agency and you're on the phone and you have no information and you're guessing as to what a player's value is going to be to someone else. I think each situation is uniquely different. If you gave everybody a month in a vacuum to make a trade or to sign a player in free agency, they'd probably come up with a different value than the one they do on the phone within 30 minutes of whatever decision you're making.
I think it's useful to look at similar players in the past maybe and how they've aged. If you're trying to trade for a player who's coming off an improvement, how many guys who are similar have kept that improvement? If you're looking to trade for a guy who's coming off a decline, how many guys that are similar have rebounded from that decline? I mean, I don't know what analytics can do to help you figure out whether a guy fits your system properly, but you can at least try to compare him to other players of similar types to sort of get somewhat of an idea of what you're getting separate from the system change.
Yeah, and going back to Prag's point, which I thought was a great point in terms of trades not working out because of system fit. And there are different, and we see this time and time again in free agency. It actually happened a lot more in the earlier stages of free agency back in the early mid-90s when it first opened up, because people see players as being productive, but they don't understand that there's certain guys that go to different systems and it's just not going to translate. Not all players are the same in different systems.
Jason David. Jason David was a reasonable zone corner who signed with New Orleans where they played mostly man and was like the worst starting quarterback in the league. One concrete example,
agree
man.
or what?
I didn't know where he was going.
I'm laughing because I feel bad for Jason David's agent.
I wonder if he has a list of
No,
my
but he was a
bus.
good zone
That's what I'm-
corner. Everybody has their talents. Jabari Greer's the opposite. Jabari Greer's a better man corner than he is a zone corner. Everybody's got their talents.
To Aaron's point, where we all try to use analytics is, this is one of the sports where everybody plays a different position. You have different schemes. What you're looking for is maybe some kind of hidden way of finding what 3-4 outside linebacker could also be a 4-3 outside linebacker. Because when you get into free agency, the asymmetry of why you value someone more than someone else, there's got to be a reason. You should always be concerned if you think a player is worth 2 times what their current team thinks they're worth. What do you know that they don't know? Conversely, what do they know that you don't know? Some of it's systems, some of it's beliefs, some of it's, as we heard this morning, coaches think that they can fix everybody or get the most out of them. But if you had a way of determining, what player in a certain system, what characteristics they had that would translate well into another system, I think that would be extremely valuable. It's just hard to find.
Which is why, and that's why I believe one of the most important parts of free agency is your own evaluation of your players. That's the critical part, because you are not going to know any other player better than your own players. You're going to know what's great about them, and you're going to know all of their warts, which is an interesting thing when you read some of the analysis of people who are looking at tackles, say, for instance, or offensive linemen saying they've only given up X number of sacks. Well, truly, the only people that know how many sacks that tackle gave up are the coaches, and or people that sit in the meetings that hear, or the number of mental errors they make, because anyone
what
who's
the
just
original play
watching a
was.
game, they have no idea, was that a game plan where they were sliding things a certain way, or was it supposed to be a chip from the back, or was the tight end supposed to be in one place? Did the tight end make a mental error? And you don't know if you're watching, if you're just a fan watching, even if you're watching the secondary and you think it's cover 2, well, is it cover 2? Is it 5? Was there something they changed in the game plan at halftime, or was there an adjustment made during the course of a game where someone's being blamed for something or someone's being credited for something that they shouldn't be getting credit for or blamed for?
And because of the salary cap, there's an extra layer of analytics in the NFL, which is because when you're talking about trades and free agency, I mean, free agents or veterans they are retail. Especially when they get to free agency, it is just name your price, and it's whether a team wants to pay that. As Kevin said, you're either in or you're out. And the draft is where it's wholesale, right? So that's why, the more players you could have on wholesale who are good players, draft picks, the more draft picks you accumulate, the better off you're going to be.
So like if you had like 11 and then like 3 compensatory picks possibly, and then maybe traded for others, that would be a good thing.
If a team was able to do that, yes. But
on March 12th.
But that's because it's I remember we did an analysis a couple years ago where we looked at a veteran team, and for example, we have a very veteran defense, and I think it's still the most expensive defense in the league on an average per year basis, and that's not sustainable over time. If every player because of the salary cap, if every player on your team, every veteran on your team took a 15% discount on their market value, you could not field that team still under the salary cap because the difference between wholesale and retail is so wide that you have to figure out which players to keep and which players to let move on and churn out, because you've got to continue to replenish the system. That's what Scott did so well at New England, is they were the kings of replenishing. And that's why they always stayed competitive and won Super Bowls, despite the existence of a hard salary cap. When everyone else has ebbs and flows, the Patriots were consistently good.
Right, with the Patriots, it was always all about the picks and having them as currency, something actually the Niners are doing right now. What do you have, 15, as we sit here today, 15 picks or something like that. So what's the value of draft picks?
Oh, it's incredible because it's currency. And what you have is we're all going to blow draft picks. So you better have as many shots at it, as many opportunities as possible, because even if you bet 50%, the more picks you have, the more chances you have of being right. They're not all going to work out. So having the picks for yourself. Then the other thing is, what we did at one point in time, we took trades. What you can do with trades if you have patience. One year we took a 7th round pick, traded for a next year's 6th. That next year we took that 6th round pick, traded for a 5th in the following year, where it eventually became, I want to say it was Richard Miller's here, he'll remember, I believe in the end it became a 3rd round pick. And it's currency in so many different ways, and just having lots of them is good, because then you can decide what you do.
It's like the Patriots have mind control powers over other teams to make them give up better picks the next year. It's incredible. A Monty Edwards, come on. Jeez.
Yeah, but what were you telling me about trading picks for the
Yeah,
following
I would
year?
never ever trade a higher pick next year because I wanted to take a guy immediately with a lower pick this year.
You've never been desperate.
I've never been desperate, it's true. But the one extra year you get out of that guy can't be worth the difference in value between those picks, especially because you don't know. The pick that Carolina traded for Monty Edwards became the first pick in the 2nd round. So they ended up trading a pick, I think, near the end of the 3rd round for the first pick in the 2nd round. If you look back, a lot of us have done analysis of the famous Jimmy Johnson draft trade value chart, and I think everybody agrees that chart overrates the top picks compared to the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th round picks. So if you go back in time and you look, almost all the most successful GMs and the most successful teams are guys who trade down a lot and amass picks and gets more shots at it, like you're talking about. Ted Thompson being a great example. And I just, yeah, you really want that guy, but is the guy that's gonna be at the next pick you have that much worse that you don't want to keep your 2nd or 3rd rounder for the following year? Kyle Bowler trade turned into Vince Wilfork, I think. It doesn't always work out. I mean, the Patriots got Ross Heidelling in one of those trades. In the Carolina one, and he can't stay healthy, but I just would never do it.
But one of the things and you've heard this
What'd you
theme
say?
come up.
He was gone.
No, he was gone. I'm dissing on Marty Herney.
I was making a mess of another
This is a Marty Herney diss. And for more Marty Herney disses, find Bill Barnwell somewhere.
Well, one of the themes that you hear come up today constantly is, how long it takes, the arc of time for decisions to come true. And trading down is great in theory, but it doesn't work when you have a coach who's in the next to last year of their contract, or you know, when teams are starting to look at things and you feel like you're in your window. I mean, that's the great thing about trades, and it goes back to what Ross says. Everybody has a different vantage point of what they need now. We took the second pick in the draft last year and turned it into 5 different picks, which was fine because we had a new head coach and a new GM, and they had multi-year contracts, and they could sit there and look at that. I promise you, in 3 years, if we were sitting there with the second pick again and they were in year 4 or 5 years, they might want to draft a player because they feel that the need is very different. And that's where, you know, ultimately, if the time frame for, you know, decision making and how things play out for head coaches and GMs keeps shrinking the way it has over the few years, it's harder and harder to convince them to make good decisions. It's great to sit here in abstract and say,
no, that's true. That's
Armonte Edwards, you know, turns into a second-round pick, but to a team that just missed the playoffs because they don't have a return man or they need speed, it looks a lot different in the equation. That's where the trading teams find value. Everybody seems to like what they do, and then in 3 years we can all say, you know, those were awful decisions, and we've all made them. And you look back and you say, just how could we have been so convinced at the time that that made sense?
You started to bring this up, but I want to circle back to this, and that is your philosophy, or the philosophy overall, on the relationship between economics and the kind of scheme that you're running.
You know, we talk about, I think teams have always adjusted their scheme somewhat to the salary cap, and I think Prague makes a great point that his defense right now, if you were to say, and they're fantastic, we play them twice, you know.
We couldn't beat you, though.
Took us 149 minutes and 45 seconds to beat you, so I think it works. But, you know, ultimately, a scheme like that is going to be very expensive to keep and get veterans to do. So either they're going to wind up changing schemes and adapting, or they're going to decide which positions are most valuable. And I've long thought, you know, teams go to 3-4 years ago because it was easier to find nose tackles. Now nose tackles are worth $12 million. I don't think people thought a good nose tackle would be worth $12 million, but it was easier to find certain positions. When I was in Tampa, we started paying centers because they were vastly cheaper than tackles and guards, but we needed a better offensive line. I think teams ultimately look for undervalued positions and will try to accumulate the best players they can at those positions, and then they'll go and see, you know, if there's a scheme that fits that. In Tampa 2 corners were guys who couldn't run. And, you know, maybe there's, you know, ultimately there are a lot more guys in the draft who can't run than who can run at corner. So if you can find a scheme that fits undervalued players, it's a huge advantage in a salary cap era.
This is, by the way, this is the heart of what the book Moneyball was about. It wasn't about on-base percentage. It wasn't about getting Jonah Hill an Oscar nomination. It was about finding market efficiencies, and the schemes, the market efficiencies and schemes ebb and flow over the years. There was a point when there were only a few teams, like 5 or 6 teams playing 3-4, and it was easier to find those guys. Then a lot of teams started playing 3-4. Now at that point, suddenly it became easier to find guys for 4-3. So when teams started to go away from the Tampa 2, Indianapolis is finding these starting defensive players as undrafted free agents because fewer teams are looking for the same players they're looking for. And Seattle figured out over the last couple of years that there was a bit of a market efficiency in tall but slower cornerbacks, and went out and got 2 of them, one in the CFL and the other one in the 5th round. And now that's the defense everyone seems to want to copy this offseason, which means that 3 years from now, those players are going to be overrated and something else is going to be efficient.
There was a period of time actually at the beginning in New England where there weren't as, bless you again, there weren't as many 3-4 teams in the league, but also there's different types of 3-4.
Right.
We weren't running, you know, Bills.
It's different than Wade
3-4 is
Phillips
different
is.
than, and/or Dick LeBeau is exactly right. So we, for a short time, were in a market for a certain type of player and 3-4 players where we could sacrifice certain skills because we needed smarter players at certain positions who could actually perform better because of their intelligence. And what happened though is when you have success, all of a sudden you turn around and Bill Parcells is back in the league, running the 3-4. Nick Saban's in the league. Eric Mangini's a head coach. All these people that leave, all of a sudden where you had this market cornered on a specific type of player, you're now competing in a free agent market, having to spend money in a different way than you had to before.
Right, and now John Schneider and Pete Carroll have to go out knowing that Gus Bradley is looking for pretty much the exact same defensive players they are.
So how does this relate to quarterbacks? in the sense of, pardon me, in the sense of classic pocket passers and what their value is, what their worth is, and say more running quarterbacks that we're seeing, whether it's Colin Kaepernick or RG3 or Russell Wilson.
I say draft one in the 6th round and hope for the best.
And make your career off of that, baby. That's it. Best 6th round pick ever.
Well, I'm just happy that ours is on a rookie contract and still has 2 more years on that contract. So that's pretty good. But yeah, it's very much system based, right? It's Alex Smith and Colin Kaepernick are 2 very different style of quarterbacks. And when one was in, we ran one system, and when the other came in, we ran an entirely different system. And so, the key success, the person responsible for that success is whether the coach can adapt and whether the coach can make those changes on the fly. And 100% of the credit goes to Jim Harbaugh in our case in adapting like that in a week or in 3 days, and then sticking through it for the rest of the season. So it's adapting and it's system based. I mean, we had a really difficult decision this past October, October, when we already have the league's highest paid inside linebacker in Patrick Willis, and now we have another star inside linebacker who is coming up in a couple years, and we thought, do we want to extend him, and do we want to pay 2 inside linebackers in a 3-4 system a lot of money? And will this system sustainable? Will it last? Meaning, regardless of what system we run, whether we stay in a conventional 3-4 or the hybrid 3-4 that we're in, or go to a 4, whatever it is, will we still have a value on 2 guys at the inside linebacker position? And there's a lot of debate about that before we decided to make the move. Ultimately, we decided that yes, having 2 sort of position transcending players was worth having on our team, but it was not without hesitation because of system.
I think one of the things, and you see it, there's a lot of discussion right now about the shrinking of the middle class in football, that elite players continue to get paid at high levels, and there's no more $3 or $4 million players. And I think a lot of that is because teams are getting better at scouting college players. The draft has become more efficient.
It's happened in every sport, too.
It's happened in every sport. And so what's happening is teams are more willing. If you say that you have $8 million to spend in free agency, you might be better off spending $7 million on one guy and $1 million on the other guy than buying 2 players at $4 million. It really just depends. So to Prague's point, you may sit down the conventional ways you used to sit down and evaluate a team of where do we pay and do we disperse it out over a number of people. I think you're just looking for difference makers, and you're looking for the maximum number of difference makers you can afford on your team. And what that's doing is it's pushing ways to find new efficiencies and finding, maybe players 35 through 53 on your roster. How can you get better and better players there that are on rookie contracts that cost less, that are wholesale, and what does that mean? How do you move forward? Because I think that's the way we looked at it. When we did the RG3 trade a year ago, we looked out and said, in 2014, we will have 12 players who were 1st or 2nd round picks under the new rookie wage scale. That meant 12 of our best players would make less than $25 million combined in 2014, which meant that the remainder of our team, we could overpay a few guys in free agency, we could make a few mistakes here and there, and we'd have a pretty good nucleus. I think we've all stopped looking to think of where you spend and just how do you accumulate best players regardless of position.
By the way, I'll add, this is why I had a problem with the RG3 trade from their perspective, because now they don't have those picks to find those talented players to put around RG3. You have those picks.
Yeah, but they have a division champion hat. And
well, that's true.
I'm up here.
That's true, but I think you're all trying to get the rings too. And now they have to do it, in order to make it work long term, they need to do a much better job than Washington has in the past, finding talent with the 6s and the 7s and the undrafted guys, and they have to stay away from what has always been a problem for them, which is the desire to sign those mid-level guys. So that's why I had a problem with the trade from their perspective. I had no problem with it from your perspective.
It's interesting, the whole idea of picks and 1st-round picks with the new system that's gotten us back to where we wanted to be, where those picks were becoming prohibitive. And taking over in Kansas City, for instance, you talk about having the most expensive defense. I know that from a cash standpoint, this past year, we had the highest paid defense in the National
Yeah.
Football League from a cash standpoint. And that's because we were carrying, because of picks, Eric Berry being the 5th pick overall, Glenn Dorsey being the 5th pick overall, and Tyson Jackson being the 3rd pick overall. What happened in the old system before this market correction, thank goodness, it was picks. The picks you were starting to wonder how valuable high picks were.
Yeah, I remember when we were, just 5 years ago when Jake Long was drafted, for example. He was #1 overall pick on the old CBA. The moment he got drafted, before he played a snap in the NFL, he was the highest paid tackle in the league, with the old CBA. And so, yes, it's much better now that it's more of a system where the money's distributed between rookies and veterans a little bit more appropriately.
You've brought up RG3 a couple of times, and so it occurs to me. He's obviously coming off a major injury. Darrelle Revis, Adrian Peterson a year ago. When it comes to valuing players who are, I hate to use the word tainted. Look, there's, Ron Wolf, the great general manager in Green Bay, once told me, he goes, I never believe a player comes back. I never believe a player is 100% after a serious injury. My point is, how do you quantify something like that? Whether it is an injury or whether it is an off-the-field issue, how does that affect the value and how you can attach a grade, a number, whatever you want to call it, to one of these players?
Wow.
Well, one reason why that's hard is that for whatever reason, it does seem like guys are coming back faster and better from catastrophic injuries.
But every
than they
injury is
used to.
different.
And so,
Every
right,
injury
but
is
so,
different.
well, first of all, if you're going to do analytics, you have to consider injuries in groups, or else you can't do it. If every injury is completely different, then there's really no analytics to do. So you at least have to consider it in groups and look at similar things in the past. But the fact is, similar guys in the past didn't come back as quickly or as well, and so that gets into questions about how much of it is about changes in medical, and how much of it is about just what Adrian Peterson, who he is as a person, and how his body works compared to, a guy who took, Edgar and James took like 2 years to come back. It makes it difficult to even have past examples to compare to, because over the last few years things have changed so quickly as far as guys coming back from those things.
Several years ago, the thought would be if there was an ACL injury, if you were a skilled player, a year later, that player was still knocking off the rust. So you had to evaluate or think, where is the player going to be not next season, but a season after that? And really, offensive linemen, ACL, not an issue. It'll inhibit them a little bit, but they'll be closer to their top performance much more quickly. Something's changed, and it is very different now. And to me, because you just don't know. The character stuff is that's a whole different set of encyclopedias, because again, the character stuff is, are you talking about a 22 or 23-year-old guy, or are you talking about a player later in his life who's been through certain experiences, been through situations, and people do change, and things will change, so it's on a scale, I think.
With respect to the character issue, so back at the Combine, they've always given the Wonderlic test, dating back to late 60s, 70s. And individual teams have always done other psychological tests as well. This year, they mandated a new psychological test called the Player Assessment Tool. In fact, I believe you were one of the general managers who was consulted about what are some of the qualities that you want to try and quantify that may be helpful to teams in terms of evaluating. So what are some of the qualities that they were examining?
They were, what we had done was we had this whole big group, or a small group of people who were talking about what are some of the things that are important. The Wonderlic is going to tell you certain things, the psychological testing is going to tell you certain things. But
And there were questions if there was a racial bias in the Wonderlic as well.
racial bias, socioeconomic bias, a lot of geographical. I mean, there were a lot of concerns as to how valid this was.
Right.
And then along with in trying to find a better standardized test for those components, okay, we're going to be doing something. What else can we find out? So we started talking about what are some of the things important that we want to try to measure somehow, or if not measure, at least get exposure to. I remember one of the big things on my mind was the difference. People are always talking about how hard of a worker is when you start talking about the makeup of the individual. We want to try to, those of us that, I want to find out more about the makeup of individuals. And to me, there was always this big difference. People would throw the words work ethic, work habits around as they were interchangeable. But to me, those are two significantly different things, work ethic and work habits. You can teach someone work habits. You can't teach work ethic. So one of the things we had asked for is, okay, give us some sort of information on work ethic, work habits, about selflessness. How can we find out through a test whether a player is more team-oriented or more selfish? And for different positions, that has different value, but from a team-building standpoint, so again, there was a long list of things that we were trying to find, because you want to try to quantify things so you can make better predictions.
How much weight do these carry with psychological tests, this new player assessment tool? I mean, what value do they have?
I think they have tremendous value. And one of the things we've talked about schemes and different things up here. One of the things we haven't talked about is coaches. And I think all of us have been fortunate, the 49ers with Coach Harbaugh's success, Coach Belichick, and Washington Kansas City with us with Coach Fisher. You're trying to give, the guys who have come in and made a difference have to coach these players. The one difference, you can have every film in the world, you can have every, combine test, you can know all the analytics, but who's going to be coaching these guys every day? Who's going to sit in the meetings room with them? How are they going to act when adversity hits? All of these things that may help determine your season. The more information you can gather so that they can then go back in their mind and say, a lot of times coaches say, this player reminds me of so-and-so who I drafted 6 years ago. When you're in a draft meeting room and, this kid was a similar background and this is what made him successful. You want to try to find some of those attributes to help make those comparisons. So many times when you sit in the draft room, it's who do you remind me of? What was the background? What was similar? And whether a coach had success or failure with that player through no, physical issues at all, but really the mental makeup, the personal makeup. You're trying to give your coaches, to me, more information by these tests, whatever tests are given at the combine, whether it's the Wonderlic, the new test, we use HRT, some other teams do. What can be done to give your coaches the most information they can about the makeup to determine whether you need to bring someone in for a top 30 visit so you can learn more about their personality, or, do you need to go to their school and meet more with their coaches, trainers to find out what makes them successful. I think the personal aspect is really an untapped area for us in analytics of how we analyze players, is certainly draft picks.
And in analyzing players and finding the standard, one of the toughest things is, one of the reasons I think they're going to be very successful at the 49ers is because with so much change and turnover within organizations, and the fact that you've been there as long as you have, and teaching and or gathering information with the changes, having some sort of standardized idea of what you're looking for, even when coaches change. Because when you hear coaches or myself, I remember in the draft room a couple of years ago mentioning, wow, this Eric Berry reminds me of Eric Turner. Now, how many people raise your hand if you remember who Eric Turner is?
Browns.
Yeah. But as you get older in this chair, you're referencing players and standards that people don't necessarily know. But when you have, and then you're having all the turnover within your organization, and your idea of athletic ability, you put the five of us up here and ask us to put a value on a certain element or a skill, and there's probably going to be at least 3 different answers, and the people that are training and mentoring the people that are going to make that evaluation makes predicting it very difficult. And again, I think it's a huge advantage that they're going to have in San Francisco, because you've been there for a number of years and you're watching this whole process, and that's why you went there with that idea, and it's really going to serve that organization well, having that continuity.
You have questions for me? Excuse me. Of course, the iPad application. Did you want to add something, Parag?
No, I was just going to say consistency is the single most important thing to me in the NFL because of the salary cap and because of the system. The coach runs a system, the general manager finds the players for that system, and then you have to pay those players. If you churn out one of those first two, and you have an entirely new system, now you've already scouted players to run a certain system, whether you want quick and nimble offensive linemen versus road grader offensive linemen. You've also then paid those guys, and you change out a system. And now you're stuck on the salary cap. You have to figure out, you have to trade or release those players for pennies on the dollar, and it sets you back a number of years. Consistency breeds success.
This is actually one of the things that I had wanted to know as well, but someone in the audience poses, how do you convince an NFL head coach to listen to an analytics kid who has never stepped on the field?
Let's ask our head coach. Oh, we don't have one here. Well, it's interesting because we were having a little bit of a conversation earlier. This is going to be a long-winded answer. I think what has to happen is what's lacking very much, I think, in our sport is mutual respect. And sometimes the people who are football people and the people who are in analytics, for whatever reason, this sport seems to have more testosterone than many of the others, in my opinion. And you get these competing egos and all of that nonsense. And I think what has to happen is you have to have an open-minded head coach, and there's quite a few in the league, but also part of that is the presentation. As I was saying earlier to someone, it's interesting listening to some of the people who are analytics. Those of you that are students in this room who are really smart and have a lot to bring to the table, I will suggest and encourage you to work on your delivery, work on your ability to communicate, because how you communicate is very much, there's a correlation as to how your information is going to be received.
Is that a nice way of saying sort of don't be socially inept and try to...
It's not just socially inept. It's going to be don't be smug, don't be smarmy, don't be those things. Now on the football side, those of you that are football people, be thoughtful and understand that the role that person is playing can have a huge impact on your success.
I said it this morning that, somebody actually asked me this morning about, I'm in college and what do you think about which, I want to get into analytics and which analytics classes do you think I should take? And I said, take negotiations and organizational behavior. Don't take any more analytics classes because come solve something first. Don't just come with a problem, but solve something. Find something that's broken, whether you figured out which running backs would be more successful or when wide receivers start to burn out. Solve something, but a 5 out of 10 piece of analysis is much better than a 10 out of 10 analysis if it's represented and communicated in a succinct way.
And then after you go take negotiation, go find the graduate assistants of your school's football program and ask if you can watch film with them. Because since I started doing this as the proverbial guy who never played the game, I've tried to learn as much as possible about how the coaches and the scouts see things. And the more that you can see both the analytics and how the coaches and the scouts see things, the more holistic your analysis will be. And also, I think the easier it is to explain it to football people in terms of their schemes and the way they run things.
Just real quick, you had mentioned something to me and I wanted to clarify it. You said that you interface with your coaches and your staff a lot during the week on game management, but not on game day. So how do you use the analytics and things of that nature when you're interacting with your staff?
Just with respect to different tendencies that we'll track, whether it's aggressiveness on fourth downs, whether it's run pass on different situations, things like that. Just different time management sort of tendencies of a certain coach, i.e. this coach generally uses timeouts in this situation, that this coach doesn't, just to help prepare the coaching staff for what to expect on that Sunday. And then the week or the days afterwards, just reviewing, what worked or what didn't. And also just, there's a lot of esoteric rules in the NFL rule book, and just, helping decipher those as they come across in random situations in random games. Tuck rule, for example.
It always has to come up. The tuck rule always has to come up in some capacity.
Golly, he grew up a Raiders fan.
No, I did not.
Just from the Bay Area.
So just there's a lot of things to help them because they have so much to do already. The coaches pull all-nighters all week. So anything we could do to help them, the better off we are.
We're running out of time, and I have to end with the fan favorite, which is always most overrated and underrated player in the NFL. If you have to base it on analytics. And remember, there's only 18 teams represented out there, so
There's no way I'm answering this.
gotta answer it. Gotta answer it.
What, are you not going to pay me?
Not hire you here.
Kick a man while he's down.
I'll make it. Every potential free agent from the Rams is overrated. I don't want anybody looking at them. I don't want anybody touching them. They're far worse than you think that they are.
As the person who is an outsider and thus free to give a thought on this,
Yeah, I know, right?
let me talk not just specifics but broad. In general, the most overrated players in the NFL tend to be players whose athletic ability does not translate into football efficiency as well as you think it does. For a long time, what that meant was boom and bust running backs who had poor vision and couldn't see their way through holes, but would make like one big highlight play per game. Now I think the best example of that is D'Angelo Hall, who I understand that when we chart games that we don't know for sure what all the coverages are, so the game charting statistics for cornerbacks are going to have mistakes. And I hate when we have readers who act like a guy ranking 10th and a guy ranking 20th is different. There's no difference between 10th and 20th. However, 89th is a problem. And D'Angelo Hall has been at the bottom of our charting rankings for like 3 seasons. He's just very fast, and he's got good hands to get picks, but he's just not a good coverage guy. As far as underrated, I think the 2 general classes of underrated are rookies who play very well, particularly in smaller markets, and guys whose failures randomly happen to occur on national television. So the names I would give you are Levante David, who was excellent in Tampa Bay this year. They were amazing against the run, partly because of Levante David, partly Joe McCoy, and partly because they could not stop the pass to save their lives. And the other name I'm going to give you is Tony Romo, because Tony Romo has been one of the 6 or 7 best quarterbacks in the league. And he's also one of the top quarterbacks in the league in the 4th quarter, if it's not on national television.
What Aaron said.
Looks like that. That's all the time we've got, folks.
So would you rather have Jason David or D'Angelo Hall?
It depends what scheme my coach wanted to run. But if it's a zone scheme, I would want David. If it's a man scheme, I would want Hall, because you could use him to do return. Maybe you use him as like a slot guy. I don't know. One of the things we've done is talking about doing scouting is that we've got film guys now at Football Outsiders too. It's not just stats. So a lot of times when we see a guy whose stats don't match his rep, I talk to Andy Benoit, right? If it's an offensive lineman, we talk to Ben Muth, who writes offensive line for us and played for Jim Harbaugh at Stanford. And Andy thinks that Washington was doing some interesting things with Hall at times this year where he was kind of playing safety, and that there might be interesting ways to use him that you would get the most out of his talents, but it's not as an outside starting corner. Maybe it was 5 years ago, it's not now.
And on that note, we leave it with the Football Outsiders. Thank you very much, Aaron. Kevin Demoff, the Rams. Parag with the Niners. And Scott Pioli, employed by the NFL Network, NBC Sports Network, and Sirius. So you really have 3 things. So you are not unemployed, I want to point out. Mainly,
We'll work for food.
there you go. Mainly, all 5 of us, we thank you so much for joining us, for taking the time. Thank you.